In this video, we'll be looking at coordination in multi-agent systems, or MAS. Coordination is one of the key aspects of MAS, as it is what allows it to become more than a collection of individual agents, each doing their own individual thing. Specifically, this video is about normative concepts for multi-agent systems. Norms are one way to achieve coordination in multi-agent systems. We'll look at what norms are, what concepts are involved, and how they are defined, how norms can be specified formally, how norms can emerge, and what happens when norms conflict. At their core, norms are social rules for behavior. The term norm comes from the field of social science and specifically from research into how human societies naturally organize. This type of research is an important input for the creation of organization in multi-agent systems. Norms, more specifically, are more or less general rules of conduct within a group or society. They are the explicit or implicit rules that are used within a society to determine what behaviors are appropriate. Norms are further defined by the fact that they form a link between more abstract values of a society and the more concrete behaviors that should or shouldn't be executed to promote these values. Norms are rules which can be broken. So, in an agent society, it is possible for agents to violate norms. However, violating a norm typically has some negative consequences, and often these consequences are social in nature. They are determined by what other agents do. Norms are closely related to values, so it is good to also understand what values are. Values are those things a person or a group of people find important, and by which they judge and choose behavior. They are abstract concepts which guide our notion of what is good. Values can be roughly grouped in that some values are similar to others, but also in the way that some types of values can conflict with others. To give an example, let's consider privacy and security. These are two main values which influence the choice to monitor something, say with a security camera. If you film a location, you make it more secure because you can monitor what's going on. But on the other hand, you might violate the privacy of those who you are filming. Whether or not to place a camera is determined by how important you find security versus privacy, and what the exact impact of the camera on those values is. Some other examples of values are independence, wealth, honesty, equality, pleasure, and success. Multiple lists of values exist, and some are more general, such as these examples, while others might be more specific to a context. Norms are more concrete than values, in that they describe actual behavior. For instance, a norm could be to never place a security camera in a dressing room, and another could be to allow cameras in public outside locations. These norms are more concrete rules which clarify how security and privacy should be handled. Norms are often called moral norms if, when they are followed, they lead to behavior which promotes some set of shared values. A norm always describes a number of things. The most important are the who, the what, the context, and the modality. As an example, let's look at the norm everyone wash hands after toilet visit obligation. This norm first described who it applies to, and in this case, it applies to everyone. Then there is an action, which is to wash hands. Norms always need some specification of a behavior. Secondly, the norm describes the context. This could be always, but is also often more specific. In this case, the norm describes after toilet visit, so the time directly after another action. And this context defines when the norm holds. Finally, the norm states that it's an obligation. This means that within the given context, the behavior should always be done. This final defining factor is the modality of the norm, and in many systems, a norm can either be an obligation or a prohibition. Sometimes permissions are added to this list. An obligation means you are required to do something. A prohibition means you should never do something. And a permission specifies that you are allowed to do something, but not required to. In these examples, there's no specification of the who. Some norms also specify who should adhere to behavior. For instance, drivers under 18 should always be accompanied by an adult when driving. Another thing that sometimes is added is a consequence. In multi-agent systems, this consequence specifies what happens if the norm is broken. This could be in the form of a social score, for instance, which goes down if other agents see you violate a norm. It is important to note that social norms are defined by having a negative consequence to violating them. If there's no consequence whatsoever, then something can be normal, but it's not a norm. However, a consequence can be as simple as a negative thought from another in the social system. A normative multi-agent system is a system of more than one agent where the agents are governed by norms in some way. In some normative multi-agent system, all agents simply have a predefined set of norms. These norms are static and won't change. However, often norms can also be modified in some way or form by the agents in the system. This is truer to how norms act in society. They can often change. Just think about the norm to shake someone's hand when meeting them, which quickly disappeared during the COVID pandemic. When norms can change within a system, the typical life cycle is generation, spreading, stability, evolution. This is circular, so from evolution you go back to generation. So let's take a quick look at these stages. Some norms emerge spontaneously, such as social norms. These are often implicitly negotiated. For instance, one agent starts doing something, others take over, but perhaps slightly differently, and if a large enough group follows the norms, a social consequence to breaking it could appear. Other norms, such as within organizations, are decided on by some group of authority. The boss states what we all should do. Once a norm is generated, it can spread through the population if more agents start to adhere to it. And once that group remains roughly the same size, the norm has stabilized. If something changes, the norm can also change and evolve into either disappearing or into a generated new version of the norm. In multi-agent systems, there are many different methods for controlling this process of norm generation. One example could be that as an agent, if a certain percentage of the agents you interact with follows a norm, you also start to follow it. And if this number dips very low again, you would abandon the norm. In this way, a norm could spread through a network of agents. Sometimes norms can conflict with each other. For instance, say we have one norm which states that everyone shakes hands on greeting obligation, and another norm which says that everyone touch others during a pandemic, prohibition. These norms state that we need to shake hands on greeting someone, but if a pandemic is going on, we aren't allowed to touch others. These norms conflict because if you want to greet someone during a pandemic, you always need to violate at least one of them. We say norms conflict if it is impossible to follow both of them in a certain context. Detecting normative conflicts is a field of study in itself. If one norm prohibits action X and another states that X is obligatory, it is quite simple to see that a conflict exists. But as the example before shows, some conflicts only become clear if you understand the behavior better. And in this case of the example, you need to understand that shaking hands includes touching each other. There's many ways of dealing with normative conflicts, and three specific options are lex specialis, lex superior, and lex posterior. Lex specialis states that the more specific norms hold. For instance, if we have one norm which holds when greeting and another when greeting during a pandemic, the second one would hold, as it is more specific. Lex superior states that the norm which comes from the higher authority holds. This isn't always applicable to norms which emerge from a society, but if norms have been decided by an organization, this can be a solution. Say that a research group has the norm to always hang posters on the walls, and the university has the norm that no paper can be hung up on public walls. The university's norm would hold. Lex posterior states that the most recent norm has priority. In our original example of shaking hands, the norm of not touching others during a pandemic arose later than the norm of shaking hands. So in this case, you would stick to the not touching. Finally, another way to solve normative conflicts is to look at values. If two norms conflict, can the corresponding values they relate to help solve the conflict? For instance, if one values tradition over health, one could keep shaking hands during a pandemic. If one values health, one would stop touching others. In this video, we looked at norms in multi-agent systems. We have seen what a norm is and what values are. We saw the formal structure of a norm, including the possible modalities. Further, we saw how norms could change and what the typical life cycle was. And finally, we considered normative conflicts and some examples of how such conflicts could be solved.